In the vast expanse of space, the Elysium glided toward its rendezvous point, her engines barely whispering as the last remnants of humanity's warship fought to keep up with the infinite silence surrounding them. Captain Alexis Rhodes stood at the helm, her gaze fixed on the star systems ahead, now under the shadow of the Vrelth. Each passing moment brought them closer to the final confrontation. The war had been long, but the Vrelth had never been closer to victory. "Captain, the fleet is assembling." Lieutenant Archer's voice broke through the tense silence, though it lacked its usual confidence. "We're outnumbered, 10-1 at least, if we don't act now." "I know," Rhodes interrupted, her voice calm but edged with the weight of the looming battle. She had been strategizing every move for months, trying to predict the Vrelth's next moves. But it was becoming clear that even their most advanced tactics would not be enough to tip the scales in their favor. Still, humanity had always fought with a kind of desperation that the Vrelth could never understand. The Elysium, now humanity's last remaining warship, was more than a symbol. It was the last line of defense. Earth had fallen, its great cities turned to ash. The colonies were scattered, survivors scattered like dust across the stars, each holding on by the skin of their teeth. Yet this ship, this crew, was the final stand for a species that had once ruled an entire planet. The Vrelth's fleet appeared on the scanners, a massive, menacing presence on the horizon. Their ships gleamed with cold, unyielding precision, their weapon systems radiating an ominous glow. There was no mercy in their approach, no hesitation in their movements. "Are you sure about this, Captain?" asked Lieutenant Salazar, his voice heavy with the same burden they all carried. The weight of responsibility threatened to crush even the most seasoned of their crew. "We're going in with nothing but guts and a desperate hope." Rhodes turned to face her crew, her expression fierce. She had never been one for speeches, but today demanded something more. "Humanity has survived because we refuse to quit. We adapt. We learn. We fight when others would have surrendered. This isn't just a battle for survival. It's a battle for the soul of our species. No matter what happens today, we stand together. We fight." A murmur of resolve rippled through the crew as they stood at their stations, understanding the stakes of what was to come. The Vrelth might have outgunned them, but humanity had one weapon the aliens didn't: sheer, unrelenting will. "Deploy all squadrons. No room for error," Rhodes ordered, settling back into her captain's chair as the battle began to unfold on the screens before her. The Elysium rocketed forward into the heart of the Vrelth fleet, a lone predator among an ocean of enemies. The enemy ships seemed to swarm, coordinated and deadly, but Rhodes had a plan. They couldn't hope to match the Vrelth's firepower directly, but they could outmaneuver them, turn the Vrelth's own overconfidence into a trap. With a brilliant tactical move, Rhodes instructed the Elysium to take a dangerous but calculated course through the asteroid belt that surrounded a nearby uninhabited planet. The dense field of rocks and debris, though treacherous, would offer them cover if they could navigate it with precision. The Vrelth fleet followed, unaware that they were about to walk into a trap. As the Elysium darted between asteroids, firing flares to confuse enemy targeting systems, Rhodes gave the signal. The human fleet emerged from cover in full force, a coordinated attack that took the Vrelth by surprise. Despite their technological superiority, the Vrelth had underestimated humanity's capacity for ingenuity. The first volley struck true. Vrelth ships shattered in brilliant flashes, debris scattering through space. The human fleet fought with everything they had, their final stand now painted across the stars. But even as they scored vital hits, the Vrelth retaliated with terrifying efficiency, their weapons tearing through human ships with merciless precision. In the chaos, the Elysium took damage, a warning light flashing across the bridge as the ship groaned under the stress of battle. "Hull breach in sections 3 and 4, cried Engineer Davis, his voice strained. But Captain Rhodes wasn't about to give up now. "Keep fighting," she barked, her eyes blazing with determination. "We'll break their line, or we die trying." Just as it seemed the tide was turning, a massive explosion rocked the Elysium, sending the ship tumbling through the void. Rhodes fought to regain control, her hands steady on the console despite the onslaught. The ship shuddered, but it wasn't over. Not yet. The final moments of the battle stretched on, the human fleet barely holding its ground against the Vrelth onslaught. And then, just when it seemed that victory might slip away, an unexpected surge of energy from the heart of the machine, an ancient human relic, activated, pulsing with untapped power. The energy blast was enough to disable several key Vrelth ships, shifting the battle into humanity's favor. The Vrelth were retreating. For now, humanity had won. Captain Rhodes stood over the scorched deck, breathing heavily. They had lived to fight another day. The galaxy may have been filled with ancient powers, but humanity had just reminded them that the most dangerous thing in the galaxy was not advanced technology, but the relentless will of a species determined to survive. "Prepare for the next fight," she said, her voice low, but filled with fierce resolve. "This war is far from over." The battle for survival had only just begun. Though humanity had won a fleeting victory in the face of overwhelming odds, the scars of the war were far from healed. The Vrelth had retreated for now, but Rhodes knew it wouldn't last. The question wasn't if they would strike again, but when. The Elysium drifted in the void, wounded but still functional. Its crew worked tirelessly to repair the ship, but morale was low. They had survived, barely, but the cost was evident. Even as humanity clung to hope, the reality was undeniable. Earth was lost, and the colonies were fractured. If humanity were to survive, it needed allies. Yet, the very notion of unity seemed impossible. Fear, suspicion, and distrust simmered in the heart of every human faction scattered across the stars. Captain Rhodes stood before the bridge window, staring out into the vast emptiness of space. The planet of Torvin, once a hub of human industry and culture, was now a battleground, its people scattered, its government in disarray after the Vrelth assault. There were many like Torvin, colonies that had managed to survive by sheer will, but all of them were fractured, struggling to remain autonomous, suspicious of any centralized leadership. "We can't keep doing this alone, Captain." Lieutenant Archer's voice broke through Rhodes' thoughts. He'd have been her most trusted officer for years, and his concern was clear in his tone. "The colonies will never unite without leadership, and right now they all believe you're just one more officer leading a broken fleet." "I don't have the luxury of their trust," Rhodes replied, turning from the window. "I only have the reality that if we don't unite now, we'll be picked off, one by one. The Vrelth are still out there, and they'll keep coming. If we're to have any chance of survival, we need to offer them a vision, a reason to trust us." But convincing the fractured colonies was a task far from simple. Each colony had its own government, its own military, its own fears. Earth might have once been a symbol of unity, but after the fall, those ideals seemed as distant as the stars themselves. The memory of the Vrelth's devastation was still fresh, and many believed that any leadership, even if well-intentioned, would only make them easier targets. Rhodes sat down at the comms station, her fingers hovering over the controls. A message from the leaders of the Torvin resistance had come in, requesting an urgent meeting. She had expected this. The colony had been one of the first to fall, and they were in no position to negotiate their own fate. It was a desperation play, but Rhodes had little choice but to respond. "Send the coordinates." "We'll go to them," she said firmly, already making plans for the next steps. Within hours, the Elysium arrived at Torvin's outer rim. The once thriving planet was now a barren wasteland, its atmosphere thick with the remnants of a long-forgotten war. A meeting had been arranged at the torched remnants of the old capital, and Rhodes would have to tread carefully. She had no guarantees the leaders of Torvin would be receptive to her proposition of unity, let alone join forces with the Kyrios, an alien species that had offered their help in the war. The Elysium descended toward the surface, its landing gear scraping against the cracked earth. The sky was a dull orange, darkened by the ashes of a once proud city. As the crew disembarked, Rhodes led the way, flanked by her officers and a small but well-equipped security team. They met with Torvin's leaders in a ruined council hall, a place that once symbolized the strength of their government. The room was tense as the leaders, some scarred by battle, others by loss, stood in stark opposition. Their faces were weary, yet resolute. They did not trust easily, and they certainly did not trust Rhodes, not yet. The figurehead of their fractured rebellion, General Andrus, stood at the forefront, arms crossed, a permanent frown etched onto his face. "You're asking us to risk everything," General Andrus said coldly, his voice low but dangerous. "You've brought nothing but promises, promises of victory that are more like fantasy than reality. Our people won't follow you, Rhodes. They won't follow anyone who can't guarantee their survival, and we won't be a pawn in your war." Rhodes met his gaze, unfazed. "I'm not asking you to follow me, General. I'm asking you to follow humanity. If we don't stand together now, we'll be nothing more than scattered embers in a galaxy that will burn us out. The Vrelth are not just here to destroy us. They are here to wipe out the very idea of what we stand for. If we want to survive, we need more than just military power. We need unity, and we need allies." The tension in the room was palpable. Rhodes could feel every eye on her, every accusation, every hesitation. She had to make them understand. The Kyrios, mysterious as they were the only chance humanity had to push back against the Vrelth. But even with their help, humanity had to present a united front. She wasn't asking them to blindly follow, but to trust in the possibility of something greater than their individual wars. "The Kyrios have offered us technology that could tip the scales. But we can't win this alone. You know it as well as I do." Rhodes leaned forward slightly, her voice steady. "We can hold our ground, or we can fall. And if we fall, the Vrelth won't stop. They'll sweep through this galaxy until every last one of us is gone. But if we unite, if we show them what humanity is capable of, we can win this war." General Andros paused, eyes narrowing, weighing her words. Then, with a slow nod, he spoke. "We'll give you one chance, but you better make it count, Captain." It wasn't a victory, but it was a start. Rhodes knew this was only the first step. There was still a long way to go before humanity could truly unite. But today they had bought themselves a future. For now, it would have to be enough. The uneasy alliance between the human colonies and the Kyrios was in its infancy, fragile and untested. The Kyrios were an enigma, advanced beyond anything humanity had ever encountered, with technology that seemed almost magical in its capabilities. Their offer of assistance had come as a lifeline, but it carried with it a heavy price. Rhodes had no illusions. The Kyrios weren't doing this out of altruism. Every move they made had an agenda, and humanity was merely part of their larger scheme. The first joint mission was underway. The Kyrios had asked for something. something that could potentially shift the tide of the war in humanity's favor. A key artifact located on the uninhabited moon of Kryn 5, deep within enemy territory. The artifact was believed to contain the power to disrupt Vrelth communication systems, rendering their fleets vulnerable to attack. If they could obtain it, it would not only bolster the human fleet's chances, but also secure the Kyrios' cooperation for future campaigns. But Rhodes knew it wouldn't be easy. The moon was a Vrelth stronghold, defended by layers of security and patrolled by some of their most elite forces. The risk was monumental. "Are we ready?" Rhodes asked as she stood on the bridge of the Elysium, her voice calm, but with an edge of determination. "Yes, Captain," Lieutenant Archer responded, his hands flying across the controls. "The Kyrios have provided us with cloaking tech. We should be able to bypass most of their defenses." Rhodes nodded, her gaze sharpening. "Let's get in and out. No mistakes." The Elysium moved toward Kryn 5 under the cover of the cloaking technology, the ship's once proud silhouette now a ghost in the void. The Kyrios had provided a small fleet of their own ships to assist, but Rhodes couldn't shake the feeling that their involvement was not entirely for humanity's benefit. She had seen the way the Kyrios watched them, measuring, calculating, evaluating. Humanity was an experiment for them, nothing more. As they neared the moon, the first signs of trouble appeared. A fleet of Vrelth warships was stationed in orbit, their aggressive posture unmistakable. The Kyrios ships, moving with unsettling precision, began to break off into smaller units to surround the enemy. The human fleet, smaller but determined, followed suit, cutting through the darkness with surprising speed. "This isn't a straightforward mission, is it?" Archer muttered, watching the enemy fleet grow in the distance. Rhodes didn't respond. There was no time for doubt. She had made her choice. There was no turning back now. The Elysium broke away from the Kyrios formation, heading for the surface of the moon where the artifact was buried. The terrain was harsh. Rocky crags and deep valleys dotted the landscape. As they descended, Rhodes could see the faint outlines of alien structures, strange and forbidding. This wasn't a typical Vrelth military base. It looked ancient, older than anything the Vrelth could have built. "We're almost there," Rhodes said, her voice steady despite the growing tension. "Prepare for landing." As the Elysium touched down, the ground shook beneath them. The ship's hull groaned under the strain of landing on unstable ground. Rhodes wasted no time, leading a small team to the surface with weapons drawn and hearts steeled. The moon's atmosphere was thin, and the cold bit through their suits as they moved swiftly toward the abandoned complex. The Vrelth were closer than anticipated, and soon the sky above darkened with the hum of engines. The Vrelth had detected their presence. "Captain, we've got incoming," Lieutenant Salazar warned, his voice tight with urgency. "The Vrelth are landing forces. We need to move fast." Rhodes glanced at the alien structures ahead. The artifact was close. They just had to get there first. The human team sprinted through the ruins, their boots echoing against the broken stone. But as they neared the heart of the complex, a chilling noise reverberated through the air, like something waking up after eons of slumber. A massive, ancient gate creaked open, revealing an underground chamber. And there it was, the artifact. A glowing orb, suspended in mid-air by some unknown force, its energy pulsing with an eerie, otherworldly power. "It's beautiful," Salazar murmured, stepping forward. "No time for awe," Rhodes snapped. "Grab it and let's move. We've got Vrelth soldiers inbound." Before they could act, a thunderous explosion shook the ground beneath them, sending them to the ground. Dust and debris filled the air as an enormous Vrelth battalion descended from the skies, their landing forces spilling out in waves. "This is it," Rhodes muttered, pulling herself to her feet. The mission had gone from extraction to full-blown combat in an instant. The team sprang into action. Shots rang out as the Vrelth advanced, their advanced armor and weapons overwhelming the humans' defenses. But Rhodes had expected this. She planned for it. With the Kyrios fleet already engaged in combat above, she knew there would be no immediate reinforcements. "Cover the artifact," she barked. "We fight our way out." The battle escalated quickly as Rhodes' team took up positions, firing on the advancing Vrelth. The orb, now in their possession, had to be protected at all costs. Every move was calculated, but the odds were against them. The Vrelth were relentless, and soon the pressure began to build as more and more soldiers dropped into the fray. Status. Rhodes demanded over the comms as the fight raged. "We're holding them off, Captain," Archer replied, his voice tense. "But we won't be able to hold much longer." Rhodes glanced at the artifact, then back at her team. There was no choice left. They had to fight their way back to the ship. The Kyrios might have been their only hope for victory, but humanity's resolve was what would see them through this. "We fight to the last," Rhodes said, her voice filled with unwavering determination. "We will survive this." And with that, the final push began. The fate of the artifact, and the war itself, now rested in their hands. The battle raged on, the heavy clash of human and Vrelth forces echoing through the ancient moon's cracked surface. Every move was critical. Captain Rhodes, her eyes fixed on the artifact, knew that it was their only bargaining chip, the key to disrupting the Vrelth's command structure and possibly turning the tide of the war. But at that moment, the cost of securing it became increasingly apparent. The Vrelth soldiers were everywhere relentless, and their numbers seemed endless. "Captain, we need to fall back." Lieutenant Salazar yelled over the comms, his voice strained as blaster fire cracked around him. "The Vrelth are pushing us into a corner. We can't hold them much longer." The team was spread thin, surrounded by a growing sea of Vrelth soldiers. Each firefight they won was only another moment to breathe before the next wave arrived. Rhodes could see the exhausted faces of her crew, their stamina running out, their ammo dwindling. But the artifact was within their grasp, just a few hundred meters from the ship. They couldn't lose it, not after everything they had fought for. "Don't give up," Rhodes shouted, her voice fierce, commanding. "We will get out of here with that artifact. Fight for each other. Fight for humanity." Her words fueled the crew, but she could see the grim reality in their eyes. They were running on fumes. The Vrelth were wearing them down, pushing forward with cold, calculated precision. Every second they spent here was another second the Vrelth gained. A deafening roar suddenly split the air as an explosion tore through a nearby Vrelth barricade. The human team was forced to duck behind debris, scrambling to avoid the incoming barrage. Rhodes' breath hitched, her pulse racing, but she didn't flinch. They had come too far. "Team, fall back to the extraction point," she ordered through gritted teeth, her voice steady despite the chaos. "We'll make our stand there." The team moved as one, coordinating their retreat while covering each other's backs. It was a risky maneuver. If they hesitated for even a moment, the Vrelth would overrun them. Yet, Rhodes knew they had little choice. Time was running out. The artifact hummed with an eerie energy in her hands as she sprinted toward the Elysium's landing zone. The Kyrios fleet above had engaged the Vrelth warships, their advanced technology raining down destruction from the skies. The Vrelth were preoccupied, but that would only last so long. "Captain, Vrelth reinforcements incoming." Archer's voice crackled over the comms, panic rising in his tone. "We've got seconds before we're overwhelmed." Rhodes pushed her legs harder, her heart pounding in her chest. She could see the faint silhouette of the Elysium through the moon's smoke-filled air. But there was no time for relief. They had to make it to the ship, and they had to make it now. "Keep moving," she shouted again. "We will survive this. Humanity will survive." They made it to the ship's landing zone just as the Vrelth forces began to close in. The final sprint was chaos. Laser fire blazed through the air, cutting through the smoke and debris. Some of the team fell behind, slowing the rest, but Rhodes couldn't afford to lose anyone else. She made a snap decision. "Salazar, cover us." Rhodes barked. "Everyone else, move to the ship, now." With the artifact held tightly in her hands, she ran toward the ship's open cargo bay. Behind her, Salazar laid down a suppressing fire, holding off the Vrelth long enough to give the team a brief window of escape. The Elysium's engines roared to life as the crew began to board, but it wasn't fast enough. "Move faster," Archer yelled, pushing the last of the team up the ramp. "We've got incoming." Rhodes was the last to board, sprinting up the ramp as blaster fire whizzed by her. She dove for cover just as the Elysium's engines blasted into full throttle, lifting the ship off the surface. The Vrelth, still in pursuit, fired their weapons at the retreating ship, but it was too late. The Elysium shot into the black void of space, the moon below shrinking as they escaped. Breathing heavily, Rhodes collapsed into her captain's chair, her body aching from the battle. Her crew was battered, but alive. They had done it. They had made it back with the artifact. But the cost was high. She could see the faces of her officers, their exhaustion mirrored in her own eyes. They had barely escaped with their lives. "We've got it," Rhodes said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. "The artifact is safe, but we can't afford to rest." "Agreed," Archer said, his voice grim as he checked the tactical displays. "But we've taken heavy casualties. The Vrelth won't be far behind. We need to prepare for their retaliation." Rhodes looked at the artifact once more. It was glowing faintly, its power palpable in the air. They had won a battle, but this was just the beginning. The war was far from over, and now more than ever, they needed to unify the remaining human colonies. The Kyrios' gamble had paid off, but only for now. "We'll hold them off," Rhodes said, determination hardening her voice. "Humanity isn't finished yet. We'll find a way to use this artifact, and we'll make the Vrelth regret ever underestimating us." As the Elysium made its way back into deep space, Rhodes knew the true fight was just beginning. But in the face of adversity, humanity had proven one thing. They were still capable of miracles. The Elysium hurtled through space, its engines humming with a steady, almost rhythmic thrum. Captain Rhodes sat in her chair, her fingers drumming absent-mindedly on the console as she watched the stars streak past. The artifact lay on the table in front of her, its eerie glow casting strange shadows across the otherwise sterile environment of the bridge. It was their most significant victory, yet it felt like a fleeting achievement in the shadow of the war that raged around them. Despite the success of their mission, something gnawed at her. The Kyrios had been quiet since the operation, their presence less reassuring than it had been when they first arrived. Rhodes had known from the beginning that their help came at a price, but she hadn't expected it to come so quickly. Lieutenant Archer approached the captain's chair, his face drawn and weary. "Captain, we've got a problem." Rhodes looked up, meeting his gaze. "What kind of problem?" "The Kyrios," Archer said, his voice laced with frustration. They're pulling back from the front lines. Their ships are retreating from the battle near Cygnus 7. I just got word from the fleet. They are abandoning the sector. Rhodes' brow furrowed. The Kyrios had made it clear that they were offering assistance to secure humanity's future, but this sudden withdrawal sent a ripple of doubt through her. Why would they pull back now? We just secured the artifact they wanted. I don't know, Archer admitted, his frustration mounting. But it doesn't make sense. We're barely holding on as it is. If they retreat now, the Vrelf will have a clear path to the colonies. The tension in the air was palpable as Rhodes stood from her chair. She walked over to the tactical map, her fingers tracing the locations of the remaining human strongholds. The situation was dire, too dire to let anything slip through the cracks. "Get me a direct link to Kyrios Command," she ordered. "I want to speak with their leaders." Archer nodded and worked quickly, setting up the communication link. A few moments later, a flickering image appeared on the main screen. The hologram showed a Kyrios representative, their alien form fluid and translucent, their voice a soft, melodic hum that somehow filled the room with an unsettling calm. Captain Rhodes, the Kyrios leader, spoke, its voice nearly melodic. "It is good to see you are well." Rhodes didn't return the pleasantries. "Why are you withdrawing from the front lines? You promised us your support." The Kyrios leader paused, the light around it shifting. "Your struggle is noted, human, but our priorities have changed. The artifact has been obtained. Your war is no longer our concern." Rhodes' eyes narrowed. "You promised us help. Humanity fought for you, sacrificed for you. You can't just pull away like this." "We have no obligation to you," the Kyrios leader replied, its tone cold and distant. "The Vrelf are not our enemy. You are." A cold shock ran through Rhodes, her mind struggling to process the words. "What are you saying? You're abandoning us." "It was always a matter of pragmatism," the Kyrios leader continued, its voice shifting like water. "You are useful for now, but your fate was never tied to ours. The artifact has served its purpose, and we must attend to matters of greater importance." The screen flickered once more, and the connection cut off. Silence enveloped the bridge, thick and suffocating. Archer looked at Rhodes, his face a mixture of disbelief and fury. What the hell was that? They've played us. Rhodes' hands clenched into fists. The Kyrios had used them. They had never been allies. They were only a means to an end. The truth was clear now. Humanity had been nothing more than a tool in their larger, inscrutable plan. "We can't afford to waste time on them," Rhodes said through gritted teeth, her voice cold with resolve. "We'll handle this ourselves." Archer nodded, but his face was tight with anger. "What about the artifact? If the Kyrios aren't going to help, we're on our own." Rhodes glanced at the glowing orb on the table. The artifact could change the course of the war. It could disrupt the Vrelf's entire communication network, cutting their forces off from one another. It was humanity's only hope now. But even that wasn't a guarantee. The Vrelf were not easily defeated, and without the Kyrios' advanced technology, their chances were slimmer than ever. "We'll use it," Rhodes said, her voice firm. "But we'll have to act fast. The longer we wait, the more the Vrelf will regroup. We need to hit them where it hurts, fast and hard." The door to the bridge slid open, and Lieutenant Salazar entered, his face pale with exhaustion but determined. "Captain, we've got new intel from the Resistance fleets. The Vrelf are amassing a full invasion force on Orpheus 3. If we don't act now, they'll have the planet within a matter of days." Rhodes nodded grimly. Orpheus 3 was one of the last remaining human strongholds, a vital resource hub for the human fleet. Losing it would be catastrophic. We'll make our stand there. As Rhodes turned back to the tactical map, our mind raced. The Kyrios had betrayed them, but humanity had been through worse. She couldn't afford to let this setback break them. If they were to survive, they had to be smarter, faster, and more ruthless than ever before. "We're not giving up," Rhodes said, her voice steady and cold. "We fight for humanity, for every last colony that's left. We may be alone, but we've survived this long. We'll survive this too." The crew of the Elysium gathered around her, their resolve hardening. The war was far from over, and now, with the Kyrios gone, humanity would have to face the Vrelth on their own terms. They would not be cowed. They would fight. And they would win. The Elysium surged toward Orpheus III, the distant planet a flickering blue dot in the vastness of space. The weight of the mission hung heavily over Captain Rhodes and her crew. The Kyrios were gone, their promises of support now nothing more than an empty echo. Humanity's fate rested on their shoulders, and they would have to bear it alone. "Status update," Rhodes demanded, her voice steady as ever despite the storm brewing in her chest. The reality of their situation hadn't fully sunk in yet, but the looming battle would not wait for her to mourn. "We're moving as fast as we can," Lieutenant Archer replied from the navigation console. "Vrelth forces have already started their descent into Orpheus III's atmosphere. Their first wave should be there in under 6 hours." Rhodes nodded, steeling herself for what was to come. "Get the resistance fleets on the comms. I want every fighter they've got ready for an all-out assault. We're going to need every ship." Archer's fingers flew over the controls. "I'll patch you through, Captain." Within moments, the holographic display shimmered to life, showing the faces of resistance commanders, their grim expressions matching Rhodes' own. Captain Rhodes, one of them, Commander Alinaxu, greeted her. "We've been tracking the Vrelth movements. They're coming in full force, but our fleets are ready." Rhodes' gaze hardened. "We don't have time to wait for reinforcements. The Vrelth are too close, and the clock's ticking. We have to move fast." "Understood, Captain," Commander Xu replied. "We'll begin mobilizing our fleets and fortify the planet's perimeter. What's your plan?" "The artifact is our best chance," Rhodes said, her voice low but unwavering. "We'll use it to disable their command network, force them into disarray. If we can disrupt their fleet coordination, we might stand a chance." "But the artifact is unstable," she warned, her voice tinged with concern. "We don't know the full extent of its power, or how long it will work. We could lose our one shot." Rhodes didn't flinch. "We don't have a choice. If we don't take this risk, we lose everything. Prepare your fleet. We'll need to launch a full assault as soon as we activate the artifact." There was a brief silence as the commanders exchanged looks, but it was quickly replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. "We're with you, Captain," Xu affirmed. "We'll follow your lead." The hologram cut out, and Rhodes turned to her crew. They were ready. She could feel it in the air, in the tense silence that filled the bridge. The Elysium was prepared to make its final push, to take a stand for humanity, no matter the cost. "Prepare for immediate deployment," Rhodes commanded, her tone sharp. "All hands to stations. We engage in 10 minutes." As the crew moved with practiced precision, readying the ship and its weapons systems for the upcoming battle, Rhodes took a moment to look out into the void. Orpheus III loomed larger now, its once serene blue surface now the site of humanity's final stand. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but they had one advantage. They were willing to fight to the very end. "Captain," Salazar called from the weapons station, his voice tight with urgency. "The Vrelth have established a stronghold on the planet's surface. It's heavily fortified, but we've pinpointed a weak spot in their defenses." Rhodes moved to the tactical display, her eyes scanning the map. The Vrelth stronghold was a fortress, but there was a narrow gap in their outer defenses, just wide enough for the Elysium to breach. "Good," she said, her gaze narrowing. "We'll take that gap. Once we're inside their defenses, we deploy the artifact. We disable their network and hit them with everything we've got." Archer's voice crackled over the comms. "All resistance fleets are in position, Captain. They're ready to attack on your mark." Rhodes stood tall, looking around at the faces of her crew. They were tired, battered from months of war, but their resolve had never wavered. They had fought for survival, for the future of their people, and now they would fight for Orpheus III. "On my mark," Rhodes said, her voice a low growl. "We fight. Humanity will stand together." The seconds stretched as the Elysium closed in on Orpheus III. The ship's systems hummed with energy, its weapons charged and ready for the impending onslaught. Around them, the resistance fleets took position, their ships forming a loose formation around the planet, preparing to strike. The tension was palpable as they awaited the signal. Then, with a final glance at her crew, Rhodes made her decision. Now. The Elysium shot forward, its engines flaring as it blasted through the gap in the Vrelth defenses. The ship's weapons fired in a rapid barrage, taking down enemy turrets and striking the heart of the Vrelth stronghold. Behind them, the resistance fleets surged forward, their ships locking in formation and launching salvo after salvo at the Vrelth's scattered fleet. Inside the stronghold, Rhodes and her team raced to deploy the artifact. They reached a central command hub, the room humming with energy, and set the artifact into the core mechanism. It pulsed with an otherworldly energy, a beacon of hope in the midst of the chaos. "Activate it," Rhodes shouted. The orb flared, sending a wave of energy through the Vrelth's command systems. Instantly, the Vrelth fleet began to falter, their coordination shattered. Ships drifted aimlessly, unable to respond to commands. The tide was turning. But as the chaos spread, Rhodes knew they couldn't let up. The Vrelth would retaliate, and this battle would be far from over. The artifact had bought them time, but how much time, and at what cost, was still unknown. "Keep fighting." Rhodes roared into the comms. "Humanity will not fall." The battlefield outside Orpheus III was a cacophony of chaos. Vrelth warships, their sleek forms now disorganized and in disarray, drifted aimlessly through the void, unable to coordinate their devastating firepower. Resistance fighters, sensing the shift, plunged into the heart of the Vrelth fleet, their ships darting and weaving through the wreckage of the Vrelth's defensive lines. The initial disarray, caused by the artifact's disruption, gave humanity the opening they so desperately needed. "Captain, we've broken through the Vrelth defenses." Archer shouted from the bridge, his voice crackling with excitement. "The resistance is pushing them back. We've got them on the run." Rhodes allowed herself a moment of relief, but it was fleeting. The Vrelth were reeling, yes, but they were not defeated. The Vrelth did not surrender easily, and their wrath was far from spent. "Keep pushing." Rhodes barked, her voice cutting through the elation on the bridge. "We need to finish this now before they regroup. Do not give them a second to recover." The Elysium shifted in space, its weapons systems targeting the Vrelth ships, still scrambling to regain control. A precise barrage of energy blasts tore through the hulls of several Vrelth vessels, sending them into a fiery spiral of destruction. Meanwhile, on the surface of Orpheus III, the ground forces, human soldiers and resistance fighters, were engaged in their own fight. The Vrelth stronghold, though shaken by the artifact's effect on their command structure, remained a formidable fortress. But with their leadership scattered and their reinforcements delayed, the human forces had the upper hand. "Captain, we're receiving word from the ground troops," Lieutenant Salazar reported, his eyes glued to his screen. "They're gaining ground inside the Vrelth stronghold, but they're still facing heavy resistance. The enemy is regrouping inside their inner defenses." "Keep the pressure on them," Rhodes ordered, her voice calm and resolute. "We can't afford to slow down. We need to bring them to their knees and fast." The battle raged for hours, the air thick with the sound of blaster fire and the thrum of the Elysium's engines. The Vrelth forces were no longer a unified front. The disruption to their communication network had scattered their forces, leaving them vulnerable, disorganized, and chaotic. Yet, despite this chaos, the Vrelth fought with a brutal tenacity that Rhodes had come to expect. "Captain." Archer's voice rang out again, urgent and sharp. "We've got incoming. A Vrelth capital ship just dropped out of slip space, far larger than anything we've seen. It's a dreadnought, Captain, and it's heading straight for us." Rhodes' stomach dropped. Despite the disruption, the Vrelth still had their heavy hitters, ships of unimaginable size and firepower, capable of wiping out fleets in a single salvo. The Elysium wasn't built to face such a behemoth. "How long until they're in firing range?" Rhodes asked, her mind already racing through possible strategies. 5 minutes at best," Archer replied, his fingers flying over the controls to calculate their options. Rhodes turned to the tactical display. The Vrelth dreadnought was enormous, almost twice the size of the Elysium. Its weapons array was designed to cripple or destroy anything in its path. A ship like that could change the course of the battle in an instant. But Rhodes wasn't going to let it happen. Not after all they had fought for. "Prepare the Elysium for evasive maneuvers," she ordered, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "We need to keep it at a distance. Archer, divert all power to the shields. We can't afford to take a hit from that ship." "Aye, Captain," Archer replied, his hands flying over the console. The Elysium began to hum with energy as the shields powered up, the ship's thrusters engaged for high-speed maneuvering. "Target their engines," Rhodes added, her mind working at full capacity. "If we can disable their propulsion, we might be able to slow them down long enough to hit their weapons." A tense silence fell over the bridge as the crew worked furiously to prepare for the inevitable confrontation. In the distance, the Vrelth dreadnought loomed larger with each passing second. Its massive weapons arrays began to glow ominously, preparing for a barrage that could tear the Elysium apart. The ship's sensors flared as the dreadnought's massive cannons powered up. "Captain," Salazar said, his voice laced with tension, "the enemy fleet is regrouping. It's a full-scale counterattack. We need to break them, or we'll be overwhelmed." Rhodes' eyes flicked to the bridge's main viewport. The Vrelth dreadnought was mere moments away from unleashing hell. They had one shot, one chance to turn the tide of the battle once and for all. "Fire everything we've got," Rhodes commanded, her voice unyielding. "All weapons, all forward energy. Take them down." The Elysium's weapons flared to life, unleashing a torrent of firepower in a desperate bid to slow the dreadnought. The blast waves hit their target, striking the dreadnought's shields and battering its hull. But the Vrelth dreadnought's shields held firm, and it retaliated immediately, its own weapons lashing out with terrifying intensity. The Elysium shook as it was struck by the barrage, the hull groaning under the strain. Rhodes felt the violent tremor of the ship as she gripped the armrests of her chair, her knuckles white. But there was no time to flinch. They had to keep fighting. "Target their engines," she shouted again. "We need to disable their ability to fight back." The Elysium dodged and weaved, narrowly avoiding another deadly barrage from the dreadnought. With a sharp crackle, their weapons hit the dreadnought's rear engines. The massive ship lurched, its trajectory shifting as its engines sputtered. "Captain, their engines are offline," Archer reported, his voice tinged with triumph. "They're losing power." "Now," Rhodes cried, "focus fire on their weapons. Take them out before they can retaliate." With a final volley, the Elysium struck the dreadnought's main weapons array. The ship shuddered violently, its weapons falling silent. For the first time in hours, the Elysium was breathing. The dreadnought was crippled. Rhodes took a deep breath. They had done it. But they were far from finished. The void surrounding Orpheus 3 had become a graveyard of ships, burning hulks and twisted metal drifting in the wake of the battle. The Elysium hovered in the silent aftermath, its hull battered but intact. The Vrelth dreadnought was a smouldering ruin, its massive form drifting in space, crippled by the Elysium's final desperate push. Rhodes stood at the bridge's viewport, her eyes fixed on the remnants of the enemy fleet. The victory was undeniable, but it came at a cost. The Elysium had taken heavy damage, its systems strained to the breaking point. The crew was exhausted, their bodies and minds pushed to their limits. Yet, despite it all, humanity had survived. "Captain," Archer's voice broke through her thoughts, soft yet urgent. "The resistance has reported in. The Vrelth stronghold on the surface has fallen. We've secured Orpheus 3. Rhodes didn't turn away from the viewport. Instead, she allowed herself a small, fleeting moment of relief. "And the artifact?" "It's still functioning," Archer replied. "The Vrelth communications network is down. They're scrambling to recover, but it's going to take time. We've got the upper hand." Rhodes' thoughts raced. This victory, while monumental, was just one battle in a much larger war. The Vrelth might be retreating, but they would not stop their assault. This fight, the fight for humanity's future, was far from over. But this victory, this one victory, would change everything. It would give humanity the time they needed to regroup, to rebuild, and most importantly, to fight back. "We've won today," Rhodes said, her voice resolute, though tinged with exhaustion. "But the war isn't over. The Vrelth will be back, and when they do, we'll be ready for them." Archer nodded, a fire in his eyes. "We'll be ready, Captain." "Prepare a message to the colonies," Rhodes ordered. "Tell them we've won. Tell them humanity's spirit is unbreakable. The Vrelth may have the numbers, but they don't have our resolve." The crew moved quickly, and soon a transmission was sent out across the galaxy, reaching every corner of human space. Rhodes stood at the command center, her hands gripping the console. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of a generation's struggle. "We stand united. Humanity will not fall. The galaxy will know our name. The Vrelth will know our wrath. We are the guiding light of this galaxy, and no force can extinguish us." The transmission echoed across the stars, a declaration of humanity's defiance. The Elysium had survived, and so had humanity. The resistance fleets, though scattered, had fought valiantly, and together they had turned the tide. But it wasn't just the artifact or the firepower of the Elysium that had won the day. It was the strength of human spirit, the unshakable will to survive and protect those they loved. As Rhodes watched the stars beyond the viewport, she felt the weight of the moment settle in. Humanity had been pushed to the edge of extinction, and they had fought back. This wasn't just a victory for the Elysium, or even for Orpheus III. It was a victory for all of humanity. They had proven that they were not just survivors, they were a force to be reckoned with. The battle was over, but the war was still ahead. The Vrelth would not give up, and they would not stop until they had wiped humanity from the galaxy. But Rhodes was no longer afraid. The war would be hard, the losses would be great, but humanity had learned one essential truth. They would not go quietly. They would not be conquered. They would never stop fighting. "Captain," Salazar's voice broke through the moment of reflection. "The fleet is requesting your orders. What's next?" Rhodes took a breath, standing tall in the face of their next challenge. "We rebuild. We train. And we strike back. Humanity's time is now. This galaxy will know that we are a force unlike anything they've ever seen." She turned to face her crew, each one exhausted but resolute. "We're not done. We've just begun." And with that, Rhodes turned back to the stars, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The fight for humanity's future was far from over, but they would face it together. The galaxy would tremble, not at the might of the Vrelth, but at the unstoppable tide of human resolve. The eternal star of humanity had begun to shine, and it would never be extinguished.